The Pac-12 as we know it is done. The Pac-12 of the future, that could come back.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and Pac-2 dominated and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review. Please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, Oregon State and Washington State have reportedly come to a settlement agreement with the 10 departing schools. The arrangement, and we don't yet have specifics as I am recording this show, says that the 10 departing schools are going to essentially give some money to Oregon State and Washington State rather than everyone getting an equal share on their way out the door. And so rather than the 12 schools getting the same amount, Oregon State and Washington State will get slightly more, which ever since the last legal ruling and how that all shook out is exactly what I thought might happen. I didn't have that sourced. It was a guess. It has turned out it appears to be correct. Oregon State and Washington State, though, control the Pac-12 and all of its assets and, any future holdover revenue and whatnot. And they're going to sort out the liabilities and such. But the big takeaway here is that the Pac-12 as a brand lives. As a legal entity, the Pac-12 exists. Now, a rule that everydayers here on the show are well aware of is that the NCAA requires you to have at least 8 teams in order to be considered and recognized as a conference. You, however, if you fall under that threshold, have a 2-year grace period. That's going to come into play later in the show. But the bottom line right here, right now, with this ruling, with Oregon State and Washington State controlling the conference, the West Coast Conference approving them for their non-football and baseball sports, the Pac-12 could one day absolutely be rebuilt. How? Let's walk through it. So, Oregon State and Washington State, this might not be, it certainly won't be next year. It might not even be 2025 and 2026. It might not be that season either because of the timeline with media rights and such. But the idea of rebuilding the Pac is absolutely alive. Is it assured? No, it is absolutely not. But there is a framework now, and steps have been taken, outcomes have been granted that allow for this to be a very real possibility. So if Oregon State and Washington State are going to one day rebuild the Pac in football, which is the only sport most people tend to care about. Oregon State fans care about baseball as well, but those are the only sports that are really moving the needle here. And as for the basketball teams competing in the West Coast Conference, that's all good and fine. You win the conference tournament, you get an automatic berth to the NCAA tournament. That's all they're really looking for there for, maximum excitement. That's how Washington State and Oregon State in men's and women's basketball over the last couple of years have found their way to the NCAA tournament. They haven't done it with an at-large. They've done it by winning the conference tournament. The Washington State women last year, the Oregon State men a couple of years ago, and that is still going to be available to them as an option in the West Coast Conference. So that could remain. Will it? We'll see. But rebuilding the Pac, here's how that would look. If I were the conference commissioner, which my resume can be readily available if anybody is looking for a particular individual to take up such a role, I'd be interested. Anyway, here's how it could look. Go get schools from the Mountain West, go get schools from the American, and build the premier Group of 5 conference in football in the country. This has inherent logic to it in a 12-team playoff because the 12-team playoff has a spot specifically reserved for the highest-ranked Group of 5 conference champion. So the Beavs and Cougs will be independents next year. They could even be independents the following year. But if these ties remain, and I know the college football playoff contract changes after the 2025-26 season, I believe, and I expect them, though, whatever happens, to have the highest ranked G5 team getting in there, as long as that provision remains. Building a conference in which you are clearly, far and away, the best group of 5 conference in the country, you are going to have your conference champion, in all likelihood, get to the playoff every single year. You will have regular access there as a league, which is a conference's primary concern. Win as many championships as possible. Win at the highest level that you can. So here's how I would go about it if I were the commissioner. I would look at a handful of schools from the American, but I would primarily build with schools from the Mountain West, who Oregon State and Washington State are about to, of course, become even more familiar with as they go about the scheduling alliance, at least for 1 year, maybe 2. I would add the following schools. So you'd start with the Beavs and Cougs, and you would add Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State. I would add Air Force. Now, Air Force gets tricky because then the Pentagon gets involved. They have to approve it. However, Army and Navy are now going to be playing in the same conference. I don't remember if that move got made official for this year, but Army and Navy are both playing in the American Conference. So it is not unprecedented for a service academy school to move conferences here. Navy went from being an independent to joining the American once upon a time. Army, same sort of deal. So I would add Air Force before I would add Colorado State, because Air Force has proven to be a more stable and successful football program. There could be some appeal for Colorado State. They've got more money than you'd think, but I think Air Force would be the play. I would start with those 4 schools from the Mountain West. I would then add 2 more schools from the Mountain West and then 4 schools from the American Conference. I would go with UNLV and I would go with San Jose State because of geographical reasons. Primarily, you can make the case for some other ones. You can say, hey, what about this school? What about that school? I hear it. I think that those 6 is where you would want to start. And I think that those 6 could also provide some logical travel partners, something I'll touch on later in the show to explain the logistics of this potentially rebuilt pack. Then you would be at 8 teams. I would not stop there. With the Beavs and the Cougs and those 6 current Mountain West teams, and yeah, this would throw the Mountain West into a pretty crazy situation and they'd be scrambling. Like the conference could dissolve. That would be absolutely possible, but the best schools in the conference would be fine at home. The lesser schools would be left to, join schools like the West Coast Conference, maybe the Big West, and then maybe like the Sun Belt or the American of football. There could be options there. But I think that for those 6 schools, you'd get to 8, and then to get to 12, I would go to the American Conference and I would grab, if they're open to it, which I would think they would be, because you know what all the group of 5 schools want in the 12-team playoff era? Access to the playoff. And this conference, I think, would be far and away the best group of 5 conference in the country, bar none. Doesn't automatically guarantee your conference champion is the highest ranked, but boy, you're going to have a really, really good shot. The schools I'd grab from the American Conference are Tulane, Memphis. Remember, we've thrown geography out the window. It doesn't matter anymore. Grab whoever you want. Tulane and Memphis. I would go with South Florida and either UTSA or Rice. Now, Rice was more of an option that appealed to the old Pac-12 that cared a good deal about academics. The advantage of this conference is that's not going to be a concern, even though it's time to bring back the age-old expression, president's vote on realignment. Going on my gravestone one day. Rice is in the Houston market. That is inherently appealing. If you're talking about building the best football conference, though, UTSA is the place you want to go. I'm pretty sure Rice is in a bowl game this year, but Jeff Traylor and UTSA, that is, at least recently, a much stronger program. I think historically, a much stronger program as well. Could those logistics work out? Could it actually come to fruition? The answer is yes, and I'll tell you how. I'll tell you how you can get tickets to your next big game too. That answer is Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry about tickets when buying tickets to your next big event. You shouldn't have to worry at all. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I personally don't care for guessing when I could get a certainty. In realignment, for instance, I don't want to guess about what could happen. I want to know what's going to happen. And Game Time puts you in that frame of mind. They're obsessed with helping you find ways to save money on tickets. They have deals right up to the start of the event, even an hour after it starts, if you change your mind. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. Locked On College is the code for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Just to recap quickly, the conference that I am proposing that I think would be the strongest option to build the premier Group of 5 football conference in America, and it would be a football-only conference. Potentially. We'll get to that on today's show. But this conference would be Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, Air Force, UNLV, San Jose State, out of the Mountain West. Take those 6, trim them off the top. And then go to the American Conference and try to pick up South Florida, Memphis, Tulane, and either UTSA or Rice. UTSA is probably the play there. That's where I would lean. Rice might have a bit more money. They're in a bigger market, but I think UTSA is where you would want to go. They're new to the American Conference, but they had a good season, and they've got a pretty solid brand football-wise, more so than Rice. So how would this work? You have travel partners. If you form this conference beyond just football, but there are also logical elements to scheduling with regards to, hey, if these teams are in a separate division, then this team, like take Oregon State, USC, UCLA, for example, over the last 2 years. In 2022, USC went to Corvallis. In 2023, USC went to Autzen. Conversely, in 2022, UCLA went to Autzen. And in 2023, UCLA went to Reeser. So there are travel partners. You got to match those sorts of things up to make a conference make some semblance of sense, even though they don't always. Here's how it would work out in my hypothetical scenario here. Oregon State and Washington State, obvious travel partners there. Fresno State and San Diego State would be travel partners. San Jose State would partner up with Boise, Air Force, and UNLV. Now, that could be a little tricky, but if you look at the geography, San Jose and Boise, not as far apart as you might think. Air Force and UNLV, it's close enough. If you add UTSA, you'd put them with Tulane as their travel partner, and then you'd have the 2 schools that are the furthest east, Memphis and USF, and they would be paired up. And so you would once again have a Pac-12. They would operate under the Pac-12 banner. And this is a conference that would primarily be focused around football. And whoever the commissioner is, Oliver Luck or whomever else decides to step into that role, maybe Gloria Navarez, I don't know, somebody who has a clear vision of how to sustain the conference and maintain, the league, stop it from falling apart and all that sort of stuff, that would all get sorted out. But if you had the conference beyond football, which should be the primary focus, then those travel partners for all the other sports could certainly work. And yeah, some of that travel would be a bit extensive. South Florida would do a lot of traveling. Guess what? Cal and Stanford are in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Calford borders, if memory serves, the Pacific Ocean. They're playing in the Atlantic Coast Conference. So it's not as illogical as that. Clearly, it could work out. Now, here's the next question and why this conference could come to fruition, but like 3 years from now. The media rights are a real hurdle, and it's something that the Beavs and the Cougs are still trying to figure out for the 2024 season, because when they have home games, they're responsible. They have home football games, 7 for Oregon State, 6 for Washington State. When those games take place, the home team is responsible for the broadcast. If there is no media rights deal to piggyback off of, or to implement, then there won't be a broadcast for the game, which of course I don't anticipate happening. I'm sure they'll figure something out now that they've delivered far more clarity on the matter. But for this deal, the reason that I talk about 3 years from now is very specific. Number one, Oregon State and Washington State's admittance into the West Coast Conference for all sports that are not football and baseball, which will be essentially independents for the next 2 seasons. It's a 2-year arrangement. Okay, so for 2024 and the 2020 for the 2024-25 and 2025-26 seasons, Oregon State and Washington State, once it all becomes finalized, they were voted by the conference to be admitted as members for all of those sports and everything. But it's a 2-year deal that they were looking at, and that's what got approved. Also, after the 2025-26 season, when that 2 years would expire, what also comes up for renegotiation? Wait for it. The Mountain West media rights broadcast deal. Boy, doesn't that feel like the stars just aligning for this to take place? Because it's almost as if OSU and Wazoo are doing this on purpose. Maybe it's just a coincidence. That they announce a 2-year temporary stopgap for all their other sports to give them stability and to save some money as well within their athletic department. And they demonstrate they can put together a schedule on relatively short notice for 1 year. And in theory, there should be no problem, therefore, doing that for a second year. But it's just a 2-year deal for the WCC. And then at that same time, the media rights expire for a conference who you currently have a scheduling alliance with and could look to join forces with to build the best conference possible. It seems a little too coincidental, doesn't it? Just food for thought. Now, it also leaves open the possibility of a reverse merger at that time. 100% on the table. That could absolutely be why that timeline lines up and what Oregon State and Washington State are doing there. But this proposal of mine, it could work. And the deal that the Mountain West has for media rights is a pretty solid deal, and it's with Fox and CBS. The sorts of partners that OSU and Wazoo would love to currently be affiliated with and find a broadcast home for when it comes to their home football games next year. So to say that that is interesting and caught my eye would be a little bit of an understatement. I'm just going to throw this out one final time. A conference, it's not the Pac-12 as we know it. It would be a reimagined, re-envisioned, reconstructed Pac-12. Oregon State and Washington State as your headline football programs, along with Boise State, if we're being honest, and Fresno State. You throw in San Diego State, and I'd go with Air Force over Colorado State. Troy Calhoun is a fantastic football coach. UNLV, because that's where you'd probably want to continue playing your championship games, and it would make a good deal of sense to be in what is an ever-growing media market and the entertainment capital of the world, or one of them anyway. San Jose State, I think logistically makes sense. Their football team has also been fairly respectable. They were held out of the conference title game this year because of a computer calculation in the Mountain West. Got to avoid those scenarios, that's for sure. And then go grab 4 schools from the American. Tulane, Memphis, South Florida, bring in an East Coast market of some kind, and either UTSA or Rice in the state of Texas. I'd go with UTSA personally. That is what a rebuilt Pac-12 could look like starting in the 2026-27 football season. What a time that could be. What a time you're going to have over at FanDuel, because that's America's #1 sports book. And as the weather gets hotter, The NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. You can pick the bowl game of your choice. If you're confident your team's going to win, you put $5 on the money line and it hits. Guess what? You get 150 in bonus bets. $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And you can spice up college bowl season over there. I'm not one of these people, but if you're somebody who believes that bowl season is just not that exciting anymore, go spice it up at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season as well. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Boy, that would be fun. Haven't done an episode like that in quite a while. Doesn't that take you back, everydayers, to the May, June, and July shows? April certainly was in there as well. Drop all your questions below. Because that is a fascinating proposition in my personal view. YouTube comments or Twitter, great ways to get into the mailbag. In fact, for this show, the only ways to get into the mailbag, at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. DMs and mentions wide open. This question came in from Bud. I tend to agree with the Oregonian on the following take. USC needed to add quite a bit in recruiting this cycle. While the staff has 9 ESPN 300 recruits committed, it feels underwhelming. Your thoughts? USC in the Big Ten finishing outside the top 15 in recruiting is definitely underwhelming. In the portal era, though, it is not as big of a deal. Being inside the top 20 is still a good place to be, no matter what school you are. If you're USC, I think that you should probably have higher expectations on the recruiting trail. But they also went and added a safety from UCLA, or a defensive back. And he comes over with D'Anton Lynn, the defensive coordinator. And USC's got a lot to work on next year as they go into a loaded Big Ten. And Oregon and Washington and UCLA, all of whom beat them this year, are going with them. And then you're going to have to play teams like Michigan and Ohio State, and they play LSU in a non-conference game as well. USC better be ready. And at the quarterback position, Will Howard from Kansas State better be the guy to step in. And I think USC needed to add a good amount of talent after this year. Did they add enough? I think you have to wait until the portal cycle comes to a complete end in the spring before you can make a determination there. But definitely being, 18th or around 20th at USC in Los Angeles. That when you're going to the Big Ten, that is an underwhelming recruiting effort. I don't know how you can argue it any other way. So it doesn't mean I think USC is automatically going to stink next year. It does mean that from a recruiting standpoint, that's not where they are capable of being for sure. So a bowl game kicks off tomorrow. That being Saturday in Las Vegas, featuring a current Pac-12 team. And I like talking about bowl games. Why? Because I like bowl games. And I think it's interesting to look at, what's on the line for each individual team. And I think that the Las Vegas Bowl represents a fun matchup. Going to be an entertaining game. Neither team was anywhere close by the time the season came to a close to a conference championship this year. And for one school, that was a disappointment. For one school, they weren't even thinking about it before the year. So in the Las Vegas Bowl, Utah at 8-4 takes on Northwestern at 7-5. So David Braun was hired after Pat Fitzgerald was relieved of his duties and amidst a scandal there. And he takes over as the interim head coach and is soon named the full-time head coach and guides them to a bowl season after a year, I believe last season, in which they went 1-11. So I think that for Northwestern, what's on the line for them in this game is the continued growth of what they hope is a winning culture. It's about to get really hard for Northwestern because the Big Ten is bringing in 4 schools from the West Coast that we're all very familiar with. 3 of them care about football a great deal. 1 of them kind of cares about football. That's UCLA. But when you're an interim head coach and you're given that job, you want to continue establishing a culture of winning. You want to bring in momentum, and that is what is on the line here for Northwestern in this game. You got a chance to beat Utah and Kyle Whittingham, end the year with 8 wins. That's a feel-good moment. Utah, meanwhile, could be playing for a preseason ranking next year. I know everyone likes to say, bowl games don't matter and they're unimportant and they're all this sort of stuff. They are the last impression that AP voters have of those bowl eligible teams as they go to set the preseason top 25. Now, some people out there aren't wild about the preseason top 25 playing the role that it does, but newsflash, it matters. So for Utah, who are playing with Bryson Barnes at quarterback for one last game, I think the prospect of ending at 9-4 might help. I'm not saying it's going to be ground altering, but could it help? Certainly can't hurt. Now, what to know about this particular game? Bryson Barnes, the pig farmer, one of the most, I think, beloved and admired players in recent memory for Utah, in the way that he's just kind of gutted it out, won some big games and played in big moments and whatnot. I think that he is in a really rare spot. I don't know that there are a lot of other players like this. He has announced his intentions to enter the transfer portal. And yet, he is going to play in the Las Vegas Bowl against Northwestern. He's going to start in this game. Now, Northwestern has won 4 of 5. Utah has actually lost 3 of 5. Here's a good stat for you, if you're feeling confident one way or the other. And I'm off to a rough season with my bowl picks as I, go point spread and an over-under in each game. I'm 1-3. But Utah, since 2017, is 0-4 in bowl games. They'd won 5 bowl games in a row. They've lost 4 in a row since. I think Utah fans are going to travel in much greater numbers than Northwestern fans to this game. I don't know how big the crowd will be, but it's not too far of a drive from Salt Lake City. It's around 6 hours, and I've seen them make it for the Pac-12 championship game before. These stakes are, of course, much lower. But I always encourage fans to go to bowl games. Why? You only get 12 or 13 opportunities in a given season to watch your team in person, and it's a fun thing to do. Who doesn't want to go to Vegas for a weekend, watch a football game, play some golf, eat some food, gamble, have a good time? I'd encourage you to do all of those things if you feel so inclined. So Utah is favored by almost a touchdown in this game. Boy, it's a lot for a team that hasn't, or a program and a head coach, same guy, of course, Kyle Whittingham, that hasn't won a bowl game since 2017. I think that changes. I like the over 40.5 here. I think that's a tad low. I think that Bryson Barnes being there means Utah is going to be able to do enough offensively. But Northwestern getting 6.5, a lot of points. Lot of points there. I think it's just a few too many. I think Utah wins the game, and they snap that bowl losing skid 24-20, just over. But Northwestern covers, Utah the win. Prediction for the Independence Bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl, of course, in Sin City. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a Merry Christmas as well, and I'll see you whenever that may be next.